All right, welcome everyone. In this video, we're going to talk about standard cell potential, okay, and references to them and such. Okay, so right, we have these oxidation and reduction reactions that we're talking about, right? Redox chemistry, okay. In an overall redox reaction, right, there's no net change, no net like number of electrons being produced or consumed, right? All electrons are contained within the redox reaction, okay. They're being transferred from one element to another. Okay, but we often, again, create these redox reactions by thinking of two half reactions, a reduction and an oxidation half reactions, okay? Right, and so here we have two different reactions, well actually the same reaction but flipped, right? And I've written what's called the cell potential for these reactions, okay? Right, and you notice the cell potential here is just the negative of each other, and that is kind of a property of the cell potential. That when you flip a reaction, it just changes the sign of the cell potential, just like you would for like enthalpy or Gibbs free energy, right? You flip the reaction, it changes the sign of the enthalpy or the Gibbs free energy, right? And so we have that same thing here for these half reactions, okay? Right? If you multiply your chemical reaction by some constant, the cell potential is unchanged, okay? And that's because the cell potential is an intensive quantity, right? Cell potential does not depend on the total amount of stuff, okay? It's an intensive quantity, so the cell potential will not change with the multiplication of any chemical reaction by some constant, okay? It's the same, right? Right? And again, this cell potential, right, is this voltage, right, that you measure from this electrochemical reactions and things like that, right? It's related to kind of the amount of energy that can be passed through the passage of this electron, okay? And is related with free energy changes in chemical reaction, which we'll get to eventually. Okay. So again, we're going to define galvanic cells as a spontaneous cell. Hinted that in a previous video. Okay. And if I want to get the total cell potential for a galvanic cell or any cell, I just got to add up the cell potentials of the two half reactions that are involved, okay? Right, and for a galvanic cell, right, to be spontaneous, that cell potential has to be greater than 0, okay? Now these cell potentials, right, again, any electron transfer reaction has to involve that electron going somewhere. So we can't really measure the cell potential of a just half reaction, okay? Because it's just not possible. It's not possible to do so because those electrons have to go somewhere. So we always have to measure the cell potential of an overall redox reaction, right? Of an electron being transferred from one molecule to another, okay? And so what we're going to do is we're going to define a standard where we're going to define the cell potential of that standard to be 0 so that everything else is in reference to that standard. Okay. The common standard cell potential is a standard hydrogen electrode, okay, where at 1 molar concentrations of H+, right, or 1 bar pressures of H2, okay, that cell potential is defined to be 0, okay. Right, so for this half reaction, we just define it to have a cell potential of 0. So all other cell potentials for half reactions are computed relative to this. And so how we get those cell potentials is you just do a redox reaction where one of the half reactions is this reaction given here, and then the overall cell potential for that redox reaction has to equal the cell potential of that half reaction, right? So that's how these things are measured in lab all the time, okay, to get the half reaction cell potentials, right? Okay, and so again, the cell potential is a difference between the potentials of the electrodes, right? It's measured in volts, okay? And you have a positive cell potential, some amount of work can be done. That's a spontaneous process, okay? And the larger that cell potential, the more spontaneous and the more work that can be done for that cell potential. And we're going to talk about the Nernst equation, which relates that cell potential to free energy change in order to have a more quantitative description of this.